everyone. I'm Amanda Haymaker. I'm the Director of Pre-Award at Purdue University. And we're going to talk to you just a little bit about this exploratory proposal development and submission group that's looking into possible demonstration projects in order to reduce burden around proposal submissions. So on your screen now is a list of everybody who's been involved so far in all of our discussions and planning for this. And I'm going to walk you through a few things before we look at some really interesting data. Next slide, please. So I'll give a quick overview of this initiative, talk a little bit about what we've done to bring in some faculty involvement, and then we'll talk about briefly about the overlap with the Foreign Influence Working Group. And then we're going to go through some ThoughtExchange results and then have an open discussion around some of the things that came from the ThoughtExchange. Next slide. So first, we've got two poll questions that we're going to have you answer just to give us an idea of who all is with us today, what the audience is and who's going to be participating in the discussion later on in this session. So we can go ahead and launch that poll. If everybody could answer those two questions, and I'll keep on going through the slides. So next slide, please. So the purpose of the proposal initiative group is to really engage with all of you to try to find ways to reduce burden related to those, proposal development and submission business processes and requirements. We're collaborating with the ERA committee and also with the faculty committee. There's also a lot of potential to collaborate with other groups, FDP, our federal partners, and various working groups across the organization. We showed you last meeting the flexibility matrix that we developed just as kind of a guiding tool as we work through these discussions. And then we launched the ThoughtExchange at the last meeting. And our next step is, as I mentioned, to just review those ThoughtExchange results and figure out what our next steps will be. Next slide. For faculty involvement, we really wanted to bring in, members of our faculty committee to provide some feedback so that we can align the focus of this group toward potential demonstrations that will have impact for both investigators and administrators to reduce that administrative burden. There have been discussions regarding this initiative in the faculty steering committee call. We shared the ThoughtExchange in an email with that group targeted to that group of faculty to try and get some feedback prior to this meeting. We also invited the faculty volunteers that came forward from the volunteer interest survey that were interested in joining the research administration committee. So 5 of those faculty have accepted our invitations and will be joining us in the future as we move forward in our monthly or every other week calls. And then we also made an effort to try to invite faculty to attend this session today. I will also like to mention that Alice Young is our research administration committee liaison with the faculty committee, and she has graciously been joining us as well to provide perspective and guidance as far as getting this faculty involvement moving forward. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at the poll results. Can we share those on the screen? Okay, so looks like the vast majority is central administration. We have a small number of faculty either that are faculty researchers or those that also have an administrative appointment. It's about 10% of our attendees today. So obviously this was the research admin committee group. And so that is the big poll or big draw there. And then for the second question, again, we have primarily administrative focus regarding your role in the FDP. Okay, so we can stop sharing those and move forward. I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk about the overlap. Lori, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I thought I clicked the button. So the Foreign Influence Working Group, we've been calling it the FIG, is exploring a key investigator clearinghouse to solve some of the foreign influence disclosure issues we've all run into. The Foreign Influence Working Group is part of the Research Administration Committee, and there are two efforts that are looking to tackle how we report foreign influence disclosure items, including the clearinghouse model that we're all sort of familiar with, the FDP. As you'll see when we talk about the ThoughtExchange comments later on, a lot of those things are related to biosketch harmonization across agencies and the difficulties that we're all encountering with reporting foreign influence. So we've put a working group together to help define what those requirements might look like, with the goal in mind of having an FDP demo or pilot around solving for foreign influence. We are working together with Research Administration since the FIG reports up through the Research Administration Committee, but this group will focus on other items while we get input from folks on foreign influence. I encourage you to attend the session tomorrow, Science and Security, the latest developments in managing improper foreign influence, and that's at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. I'll be talking about the clearinghouse, and we'll be talking about other efforts around foreign influence and creating systematic solutions. And with that, next slide, please.
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. This is Stephanie Gray from the University of Florida. As Amanda indicated early on, just due to the very broad nature of sort of proposal opportunities in that space, we thought it best after an initial group discussion to solicit feedback from the broader community. ThoughtExchange is a web-based tool that I know Amanda did a great job of facilitating the discussion around during the session, and many of you completed the initial response to the ThoughtExchange during May. And we were very happy in the short time to have an additional number of responses from faculty as we discussed. So I'm going to go through today just a few slides quickly to show you the types of responses that we got and help to frame what hopefully we spend most of the time today on as the discussion around themes that came out of that ThoughtExchange. David, next slide. So just to let you know, there's 148 responses. And as the way ThoughtExchange works, you can individually add a new idea, or you can simply rate others' ideas that are already posted. So we'll talk a lot today about the ratings and the topics that rated the highest. So David, go ahead to the next. Very similar, exactly 72% of the attendees at today's session are central administration, and 72% of the respondents to the survey were central administration as well. So it seems like the group that we've got with us today will be very representative of who responded. We're very thankful that during the late push, we actually got 22 faculty responses. We only have, as of last count during the poll, 16 attending today. So again, that's definitely a space we want to try to invite more and more participation, but it does represent a good 16% of our faculty population. David, next. Again, just to let you know, this is the institutions that did respond. So next slide. So this is where we're going to get into a little bit more detail. The one slide we didn't post here is that there was two initial questions that were asked. One was they were both just yes, no responses to, do you think in some expansion of a just-in-time like model that NIH uses post-submission, something that you would call is most valuable? And that was an 81% positive response. And the second question was, do you think something like pre-proposals or scientific letters of intent would have value? And that one only got 50% response. So much of what you're going to see from here to forward, I want to frame with sort of that very high level response that 81% said something around the frame of JIT. And that matches up again when you see NIH and NSF, who both have that sort of thought at some point in their life cycles, did indeed respond with that. So 13% say relatively distributed, but again, we're getting a high volume, certainly of NIH and NSF funded experiences in the responses that you're going to see in the next couple of slides. David, next. All right, so I'm going to harken back to something that Lori said. So the biosketch, the content certainly of the biosketches and the support forms, which as you can see is two of the high ranking words in the thought clouds, will be topic certainly the foreign influence and the science and security session tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So again, I'd echo Lori's invitation to discuss the content of those forms there. But I think what you'll see in the next 3 slides and the conversation that Lisa will kick off is there's some opportunities, as you can see, with harmonization and JIT, and that's where we'll probably spend most of the next couple of slides discussing. Maybe next. All right, so for those of you that weren't able to join the word cloud conversation, the way that it frames is that any user can enter in an idea. And so someone entered in that they wish that there was more harmonization across agencies, and then they enter a small description. That then becomes available for anyone to rate 1 to 5 stars. So of the hundreds of ideas that were thrown out there, these rated the highest amongst what the software themed as harmonization. So again, Lisa is going to address a matrix that we've designed of all of the different agency opportunities, which will talk a lot about harmonization, but we wanted to give you a high level look at what rated the highest within each theme that the ThoughtExchange tool created for us. Again, harmonization of the BioSketch and other support forms, harmonization of all forms, and then again, harmonization of requirements that are information requested at the JIT stage. So the JIT will flow on, David, to the next slide. And we have 3 slides about JIT because that, again, that rated as an 81% yes to, we think this will have a big impact. The first slide talks about the overall. So again, this is of all respondents, this is how they rated some opportunities for burden reduction in JIT. The next slide will be specific only to administrators and then, or to faculty, and then the third slide, administrators. So I just want to context, you're going to see 3 slides that are very similar in a row. So again, expanded use of JIT is a high ranking theme. Each one of these plays slightly on it. As you can see, the 4th bullet references specifically some of the NSF, the data management plans for NIH, the postdoc mentoring plans, simply wider use, more agencies using it. So this is clearly whether you're seeing a very high coalescing around just an expansion of agencies using this as a tool with the success rates, again, for most of the NIH and NSF funders and those with the high respondents hanging around 20% still, you could see where 4 out of 5 proposals then wouldn't have to provide a lot of the additional information. Next slide, David. If you go to the faculty specific responses, again, you see a 3.8, 3.7 rating of the faculty respondents. DOD and NSF still require pending support at proposal stage. Specifically, then the next, again, current and pending at proposal stage, but this one respondent expands that to include cost share details and potentially NIH human subjects forms. The third, again, very broad, why provide award management info 8 months in advance when it's just going to change, talking about the review cycles of many of our federal partners. And then again, interagency harmonization about what is required at JIT and not. And Lisa, again, will have some opportunities to talk about that when she shows the matrix that we put together. Next slide is specific administrators, but again, you'll see a very high correlation, shifting submission of documents such as current and pending to a later stage. And again, I know that this will be a high conversation at the foreign influence group, but I think what you'll see there is a stronger focus on the content of those forms and less about the timing of when they might be submitted. So we'll continue on the timing as we go forward in our conversation today. Again, harmonizing unilateral formats, consistent formats. Again, the content might be something that's picked up at the foreign influence working group. So you'll see some themes about, today we'll hopefully keep most of the conversation out of some of the current and pending content and hand that off to the foreign influence group. One last slide of comments from ThoughtExchange, and this one was specific to budget. And 2 themes came out of it. One is shifting some of the information that we're currently required to provide at the proposal stage, with regards to the budget, possibly to a later stage. And as we all know, NSF has a lot of revised budgets, and that might be an opportunity to leverage some information about what level of budget detail is necessary at time of proposal. And then second, is there consideration of NIH modular budgets and such other opportunities that might easily expand to some of our federal partners. And so that did come out as a second high-ranking theme. I want to throw as we go, obviously, our federal partners are important in FTP, and making sure that we are considering what they need as part of the peer review process is something that we'll have to continually keep in mind. Is just because it's burdensome doesn't mean that we can get rid of it. There's still, scientific value in making sure that we, maintain the integrity of what is necessary for scientific review. But again, you're certainly seeing some themes come out that some of the information might be either more accurate, even if we push it to a later stage of the life cycle. So again, of the hundreds of responses in the 2000 rankings, this is what played out in our initial cut. So Lisa, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Steph. Hello, everyone. Lisa Mosley from Yale University. So this matrix was put together, I think if you attended the May session, you saw it. And this is really just highlighting the types of items and how each agency handles them, whether it's at JIT or if it's included during the proposal. You can see, the timing, and again, I'm just going to echo because I want to be, just like all my co-presenters, emphasizing that the content for current and pending other support, we're not going to tackle that. That's going to be with the FIG group that Lori mentioned earlier, but could we change the timing of that? And then I would also highlight that even though some of these are handled at JIT or proposal, the ones that are highlighted, are there other things that are on this list? I think budget came up, Steph just talked about, could there be some version of a budget at proposal stage, but a deeper dive or more details created at the JIT stage? I think, looking at this matrix, obviously, one, it just jumps out like harmonization. Could we even get some of the federal agencies to harmonize, what could be JIT? So not only expanding the use of JIT across the federal agencies, but then is there an opportunity to expand what is eligible to be submitted through a JIT-like process as well? And so next slide, please. And so with that, we want to open it up to all, 245 of you to get your thoughts and feedback on the JIT focus. Are we going in the right direction? Are there things that we maybe haven't thought about? So I think we can do, we're going to monitor the chat. And then I think we have the ability to do the raise hand focus as well. So we're going to try to keep it from everybody not talking over each other with all your amazing ideas.
And while we wait, I do want to highlight that the clearinghouse working group that's working on foreign influence is considering just in time as part of the solution, because I know that there is a tension in what is needed at the review of a proposal to make an adequate decision around foreign influence topics by the agencies versus what they need at the time of award. So it is a difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm. And David, can you go back to the matrix slide just so attendees can kind of keep all of those topics that have been identified in their mind and add to the list if we missed any? So I will say, I think that I would like to see the timing of current and pending and other support move to JIT across all agencies. Like I think I would be a big proponent of that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about quite a bit in terms of the biosketches and the current, pending, and other support formats, and people who've heard me talk about this, I'm like a broken record, is they're all artifacts of paper applications. And we've moved well beyond that. So the way that we frame them and the way that we talk about them and the way that researchers prepare them is on the concept of a page limited application process, which is still conceived of as a paper, even though that's not what it is anymore. There are a few.
Yep, so we have a comment. Alex had said the concept of expanding JIT has been brought up many times, but there's been some resistance. And do we know why? Have the agency reps sort of indicated why they don't? I don't know that it would be the same across all federal agencies. I think that there has been some concern about the peer review process and internal change management that they would need to do to change that. I'm not aware of any other reasons. Has anyone else heard?
I think there are really two things that I've heard. One is scientific overlap and understanding that before and during the scoring process. And, you know, sort of because it is part of the decision-making process there. And the other really is foreign influence and wanting to know all the information at the same time. And, but also acknowledging that, yes, it does change over time.
Yeah.
It's not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah, and I think, Stephanie, it was you that highlighted earlier about, you know, just because we think it's a good idea, I mean, we still need to partner with federal agencies to move forward with a pilot. And so I think that, you know, it's definitely something to get their input and feedback on. I also saw another comment that they think the idea of a pre-proposal would end up saving the most time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a really interesting thought, because if we did pre-proposals and only ideas were advanced, then maybe the rest of this really is not really just in time so much, but it is in a separate part of the process where if an idea doesn't advance, the researcher doesn't have to do all of the different forms that go along with it. It's a lot.
Let's see. Oh, the other, sorry. Let's see. The other idea that came up was using the collaborative proposal model rather than the issuing of subawards, and how that could reduce burden as well. Agree with that.
Yeah, we could delete the whole section on subrecipient monitoring.
Someone makes a good point that the current and pending info changes a lot between submission and award time, as that being a good reason for it being collected at the just-in-time stage, which is very true. And then as a counter thought toward the pre-proposal ideas, that those can be incredibly competitive. So that might make that part of the process more burdensome if widely implemented. And that's, you know, from a faculty member. So that's part of the reason why we've asked for faculty input and participation, so we can hear those thoughts as well. But anybody, if you want to raise your hands, you can talk. We don't have to just have this conversation through chat and us repeating. So feel free to raise your hand.
Amanda, I think it would be good to get additional faculty input about pre-proposals, because it would be good to get input from the agencies that have tried them, because I have colleagues who have experiences that echo what Michelle says, that the pre-proposal can increase the burden because of the competitiveness. You end up having to essentially write 2 proposals. And there's some faculty concern that you're distributing your ideas earlier, and that increases competitions. But I'd be very interested in hearing from, say, some of the divisions at NSF that have moved either toward or away from pre-proposals.
One of our investigators at the University of Florida threw out maybe not increasing pre-proposals, but shortening potentially, and this has, again, various opinions, the research strategy length. And if you can't say what you need to say in sometimes shorter sections and looking at components of the fact, individually diving into some components, not simply eliminating, but shortening some of the obligations to communicate. And is that the better or worse? Again, is it harder to be more concise sometimes? But, you know.
So there's a comment in the chat also that echoing the pre-proposals increase the burden, but also there's a bias against novel ideas. Jerry, would you mind unmuting and expanding a little bit on that comment?
Let's see, that's Jerry Cohen. Let me see. I can see him to unmute him.
Oh, I didn't know that we couldn't unmute ourselves. Sorry about that. Actually, I did know because David told me, I just forgot.
Okay.
Okay. I get special permission. So it's very easy to write a pre-proposal or something on work which is well accepted and well understood. But where it falls down is where you have a truly novel idea. Yeah. We're trying to explain that to people requires building up a significantly complex argument. So, you know, we say that we want to fund really new ideas, but to explain those ideas is not always simple. And so truly novel work does not do well in short formats. And, you know, I just point out that the average proposal is about 45 pages, of which only 15 is the proposal. If you really want to cut down on proposal size, the proposal description is not the place to focus. Just, you know, think about that, because it's pre-proposal, in my humble opinion, since I've worked at NSF during a period when they were playing with that idea, just creates additional work for everybody. The only reason for pre-proposals in NSF, you know, this is my opinion, not official. My opinion was that it got their success numbers up because they had fewer proposals to review in the second round, which is their success rate number comes from. So they ended up with an artificial high number of successful proposals because they got rid of a bunch that they didn't have to review. Anyway, that's enough. You don't need me to keep talking.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I wasn't aware of that. So, okay.
Sounds like we're getting a lot of echoes in the comments on that same topic. So it sounds like pre-proposals is clearly through both ThoughtExchange and this conversation sounds like possibly looking at some other opportunities. So shifting our focus, are there other administrative components that may be likely candidates for shifting the timelines? Alex throws out modular budgets. I think within FDP, there's been an interesting sort of conversation about internal budgets still being required at modular, and if, again, as a community, if there's some pilot that doesn't potentially involve federal agencies, which might be easier to get off the ground if we've got some way to mitigate the amount of burden that might be done internally for some institutions that are still requiring details with modulars. I know that's a big concern, that the F&A might not be correct and you still need to validate so that you don't end up with a shortfall. But I'd be interested in more conversation about what parts of the budget might be an opportunity to address.
And there have been a couple comments that with expanded use of JIT, making sure that deadlines are reasonable. I think that is definitely something to take note of. There's a suggestion about why do we have to put our institutional information on forms when they can get it out of sam.gov? And we have another one about the collaborative proposal model.
I echo the burden of all the administrative information and reps and certs. However, I recognize that that burden is almost primarily on administrators and less on faculty to have to deal with, at least at our institutions. So I know it would be very self-serving to focus in on that one from my perspective.
So I can share on the collaborative proposal model. I heard, this was several years ago, that some institutions may not be as a fan of that model, as those expenses may impact their rankings. Has anyone else heard that? Just curious. You don't have to admit it in public. So
I'd be curious, there's lots of conversation about a modular cap. One of the brief conversations that we had as a committee preceding the meeting was maybe not going holistically to the modular model, but considering some abbreviated budget justification for cost categories that may be very intuitive depending on the nature of the science. Mm-hmm. So be interested in, again, thinking creatively about within the budget space. Again, faculty are heavily involved in the justifications typically. Is that a space where is there any interest, or modulars seem to be model for us? I'm thinking something like travel, the number of trips, and let's be honest, right? You see $3,000 for presenting at a conference results. Most of us don't blink, don't flinch. So how much time is spent drafting a paragraph that says something we all expect to see every day within a budget?
Someone makes a point that we're submitting other support pages repeatedly for the same proposal. That's a definite source of burden if they're just not proceeding forward with the award the first time. I can remember submitting my F&A rate agreement probably 4 or 5 times to the same individual to get one award because they kept losing the email. So. And it was a federal agency that should have been able to access our agreement without me emailing it to them.
Yeah, the last comment in the chat is harmonization. I think, again, we've been working on that. We'll continue to carry that flag. Is anyone, I guess, to flip the coin, or not the coin, but the conversation, does anyone think expanded use of JIT is a terrible idea? They hate it.
I would have told you a few years back that I hated it, but in my mind, you know, the requests we were getting were administrative forms with, you know, reps and certs, requests for budget justifications that went so far as making me do the math on salary calculations and show them. I mean, we still get those, but that's from just a few select agencies. So it doesn't have as broad an impact to focus on something like that. And in those days, I didn't want just-in-time requests. I wanted them to just give us the award already. So, but if it meant shifting things off the proposal, definitely, I think it would be a benefit to a lot of us.
Okay. Some of the comments are, the timing seems to be really important. So if you get, you know, if JIT is expanded and then you get 15 requests with a 24-hour turnaround time, that's definitely, that could be a challenge. So we'll have to make note of that.
As Brenda Kavanaugh commented too, I think it's a great comment. I think there's still some confusion around NIH JIT because they'll open it at certain scores and then they don't need it and you're not funded and then you send it the email. So I do think there's a lot of some clarity potentially around communications when it is required and yep. Not having that. I think that's a great opportunity there. I also do want to comment that 9 days before the end of the federal year, we're all sort of the halo effect or the recency effect of our experiences with JIT these 2 weeks is probably could be influencing some of our immediate opinions. So
yes. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm gonna dive in here. So everybody says expanding JIT. So I'd like to, if we can, I think we've got some time for maybe taking a deeper dive into exactly what I think, Lisa, you indicated, right? NIH has done the most extensive implementation of that over the years. You know, NSF revised budgets, I wouldn't exactly call JIT because it doesn't take anything off the proposal stage, but you know, really, if we think about the NIH version of that, does that translate well? Are there things, are specifically components of that work well or are difficult? Is it really just the other support that is the single greatest value in that being late? So I'd be very interested in comments on specifically within our experiences with agencies who have implemented, what elements of it can we model, can we leverage with other conversations with other federal agencies as we go forward if there is indeed something that's already working. So anyone want to add comments or chat about, is it, if we go back to the matrix that we've got exposed, is it really just the protocols and other support? Those seem to be the two big. Is that the biggest impact?
I think it would be another question. It would be good to, I think, for the peer review and engaging with faculty of, you know, what do they really, what influences them the most when they're scoring and making recommendations for funding? Like, what do they want to see? And I think, you know, having faculty that have served as peer reviewers may be a good, collecting with that information may be a good place to start engaging with federal agencies too. Approach and significance best predict overall impact scores. So is it really that it's the scientific pieces with maybe some abbreviated version of expertise and resources? And even though everyone hates pre-proposals, I mean, maybe it's some sort of hybrid approach that the science is not, like, it's not the page limits or that's being reduced, but really it's, the focus is on the scientific technical pieces, and then the administrative pieces are submitted at JIT. Amanda Haymaker raised her hand.
I don't think that's actually me though. So
oh,
somebody's got my link, because remember, it's probably one of our faculty. Can we tell who it is?
Maybe Amanda too can throw something in the chat. So
I think I got it.
Hi.
There we go.
Yeah, I would like to comment. I'm a faculty member who reviews proposals, and I mean, it's sort of obvious. I don't look at basically any of this stuff. Other, you know, you read the scientific part, you maybe look at the budget to make sure it's reasonable, but you know, I'm frankly just appalled at the time that gets wasted preparing all this useless information. Okay, I mean, it's not totally useless, but it's really the tail wagging the dog. And what I thought FDP did was to sort of push back against the agencies and, you know, really try to get them to dial this stuff back. But instead, it seems to be more like, well, how can we, you know, meet the latest unreasonable demand? I'm sorry, I'm probably way off the mark here, but that's just my perspective as a faculty person.
So I don't think you're way off the mark, and I think that it is a balance that we try to, it's a fine line that we walk of pushing back and looking to reduce, figuring out ways to reduce burden. So, but I appreciate your comment very much.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see that any of this is going to lead to reduced burden. It's just, and again, I apologize for ranting and raving here, but I just worry that it'll just be ever more elaborate approaches that just get more and more complicated. And it's because it avoids the root problem, and that it's like every time somebody on the National Science Board gets a toothache, suddenly we're filling out another form, and it's really disheartening. I mean, I'm at the end of my career, so it doesn't bother me, but well, it does bother me, but it doesn't affect me directly, but I do feel bad for my younger colleagues.
Thank you. Jennifer Ponting, University of Chicago.
How are you guys? I feel like, can we put that faculty member, can we put you on a poster, sir?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I really appreciate the point of view, because I think that as administrators and leaders, we tend to forget that there is a perception that what we believe that we're doing and kind of trying to make things more straightforward and streamlined, we're fighting uphill, like, against the current, and it is not always perceived that we're doing what we should be doing or pushing back enough. But I do believe that the era of reducing administrative burden is over. Like, I do not think that we live in that world right now, and we may come back to it, but from what I have seen over the last 3 years and what we continue to see and what I think is going to come January 25th, I really think that continuing to give lip service to this idea of reducing burden is not doing anyone any favors. I think we just have to admit that we're not doing that anymore. Like, the agencies aren't doing that anymore. And perhaps then we could try to start doing it again. I don't know.
I will never give up, Jen. I will continue to fight the good fight.
No, I mean, I think it's worth fighting, but I wonder if we have to restart the war, right? Like, I think we've lost the battle, and maybe because people just have lost interest in it. And so do we have to like change the front, right? Like, do we have to acknowledge that, like, we have stopped reducing burden, we've added all this burden, and we need to start over? Does that need to be explicitly stated? Maybe.
Okay.
I think you're onto something. I think that one of the things we've been talking about around foreign influence is that the construct of the procedure and process that is decades in the making is what creates the problems we have. So how do we get to a place where we're fighting administrative burden from a system that actually takes away these artifacts that are causing our problems? I think you're right. It's a different angle.
I'm going to go ahead. Alice Doyle, you've had your hand for a little while. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. From Loyola Mountain, I'm just at a PUI, but everything, it's like a macro situation, right? And I just don't understand why co-ownership of these issues with the federal agencies. We worked hand in hand through this whole electronic administration push, and we love NSF. They sort of were on our side. That's what it felt like. We certainly know they have to oversee things from a very objective viewpoint, but they're also going to get some of the best science that's out there. So I don't know, it's kind of like a seller's market. Like, they just dictate and we just, like monkeys, do. And I'm just not understanding. It's worrisome to hear that the whole idea of reducing administrative burden an artifact, what are we just trying to do is to, facilitate for our faculty and get the science out there that's going to improve life. And yet this other faculty member, it was so cogent in what he said that this just seems just overbearing. And then the foreign influence, I keep saying this, I feel like we're getting punished. Things happened, they were valid things, and now I know that's not the intention, but that's what it feels like. And the point being, why there's not co-ownership. They should find ways to not just make it easy for us, but to coexist with us and to help us get to a point where this is all reasonable and viable. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Kurt Winter.
Hi, Kurt Winter, worked, not faculty member, worked in a department, research departments for a long time, hand in hand with faculty. Just real quick for the professor, I'll look like a quitter for just a second. If you didn't have any burden relief on the number of things, and it's easy for me to think that's not going to happen, again, sounding like a quitter for a second, it would seem to me probably, I'm guessing for most researchers, it would be a no-brainer. Hey, all this stuff's going to be required. Can I submit as little of it as possible at proposal time and then be swamped later when it looks like I'm going to get funded? I mean, it still stinks. It's still a burden, but I would think most PIs would just look at that and go, yeah, as much as possible at JIT. I'm curious with that for any of the faculty online or other people who have insight, what they think about that. Because to me, it comes across as kind of a no-brainer question. Even though it's a real pain in the butt to be pressured, still, you're only going to get it when you're about to get funded and not all the time. That's my question. Over.
As an unmuted faculty member, I would say I agree with that. I think both as a proposal submitter and as I think I've been on NIH review panels for about a quarter century. At review and submission, you're selling an idea and evaluating an idea. I think all of the stuff that demonstrates both ability to do it and lack of conflict of interest should be done at JIT.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all faculty who have shared your opinions. They're very much appreciated and necessary.
Looks like we have another hand up. Carol, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, my comment is, let me start my screen too. Is both as I wear faculty and a research admin hats. And I think one of the things with the just-in-times generally having such a short turnaround is faculty are maybe in the middle of teaching or other sorts of things. And so the only thing I could see coming down the line is if someone gets notice that, okay, great, they're likely going to get funded, and say they've never put together a current pending document before, things like that. And then all of a sudden they have to throw a whole bunch of things together. That's the only, I think it's a great idea, but that's the only place where I can see, unless the university has a lot of admin support where someone can come and kind of hold somebody's hand through that process and just in time, it might, they might just not be able to comply with what the agency's deadlines are if they're too quick.
Yeah, I think that's another good point. So again, I think timing, like it sounds good in theory, but sometimes the devil is in the details for implementation. So.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what Brenda Kavanaugh said early, right? There's the tension. You've got a scale where NIH releases it so early and so such a score that includes far too many people to submit JIT. So nobody does it. And then you end up with this compression. So finding the middle balance maybe between where the much more closer likelihood of scores aligning with who's really going to get funded, and that would be a useful conversation. Kurt, you have your hand up again. I'm going to unmute you, and if it was just still left up, let us know.
Is there any prayer of the requirements going down? The 17 things that are required for an NIH proposal? Is there any possibility that NIH or other sponsors goes, hey, we really do care about whittling that down with input from the FDP and the researchers or not? Like, is that realistic? Is that ever going to happen?
I think there is certainly interest. And I would say, think about your own institution and how hard it is to implement change and steer the ship. I mean, I think federal agencies, also struggle with that as well. Karen Bales had an interesting comment that she put in the chat about expanded use of JIT and making sure to be thoughtful about unintended consequences. The less info that you give up front, the more assumptions that might be made, i.e. I trust this person who is more known to me, and that those assumptions could hurt early career and more vulnerable scientists.
Yeah, I think that echoes what Jerry Cohen said early on, that we need to make sure that novel ideas continue to trickle through despite the methods that abbreviate some of the opportunities.
So I think we've had just really good discussion here and a lot of good feedback. We luckily get to keep this whole chat so we can go back through it later and think about next steps and where to move forward. I love the ideas of bringing some agency reps in to talk to us about some of these ideas and why maybe they've not gone forward in the past, and just see where we can go from there. We're in the last 4 minutes, so I need to turn it over to David to wrap us up. And I think everybody's seen that the foreign influence session tomorrow is at 1 o'clock, and that would be a great place to hear more about this or about their efforts and how that might tie into some of this discussion.